Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast. I'm excited about what we have in store today. The presentation is geared towards business and technology leaders or power users in small to medium-sized businesses who run Microsoft Dynamics GP as their financial accounting or ERP software. We know that GP customers are a very loyal group with significant experience about how to get the most out of the software. What I hope to do today is build on that experience and insight with information, examples, and demos, as well as interviews with customers like yourselves to help you understand Microsoft's vision for financial accounting and ERP in the cloud and what that might mean for GP customers. So let's get underway. First, by way of introduction, my name is Elliot Fishman. In 2007, I co-founded a company called Catapult ERP Services, a Microsoft partner, with a vision to change the way small and mid-sized business customers experience the adoption of business management software. We set out to make it a positive, low risk, and transformative experience. No easy task. Today, we have customers across a wide variety of industry sectors, from not-for-profits to distribution, construction to manufacturing, and high tech. We love helping businesses with digital transformation. So let's talk about the structure of today's session and what we're going to go over. First, I'll spend about 10 to 15 minutes discussing Microsoft Dynamics 365 and Business Central, what they are and how they relate to GP. We'll dig into the similarities and the differences. What I'll do is I'll share my opinion and perspective on how the Dynamics 365 platform relates to GP customers, what you can expect from Microsoft in the future, and we'll get into details around capabilities in each platform, what it's like to own and manage a GP versus a Business Central implementation, and the user experience. Next, I'll introduce my colleague, Ramin Margi. Ramin's a CPA and senior consultant at Catapult who loves financial analysis and reporting. He'll tour you through the key benefits of Business Central when it comes to segmentation of financial information and using it in powerful analytics. I think the audience is really going to like Ramin's Power BI and Business Central demo. Then we'll turn it over to another colleague, Josh Stove. Josh is an ERP consultant at Catapult. Josh worked with our customer, the GSL Group, in 2019 to convert them from GP to Business Central. He'll interview GSL's controller, Vicky Barton, about the experience as well. And then we'll wrap up with some thoughts about migration from GP to Business Central. So let's get going. First of all, I'd like to chat about what Dynamics 365 is. So Dynamics 365 is Microsoft's brand for its cloud enterprise software. Or you might know 365 from Office 365. Very similar with Dynamics. So where there used to be Microsoft Dynamics, there's now Dynamics 365. So what does it mean to be built for the cloud? I don't think Microsoft actually publishes a definition of this, but to me what it means is that the applications have a responsive web-based interface, meaning there's no Windows client in the case of ERP solutions. So unlike Office, where you can still download a Windows version of it, the business management solutions, ERP solutions in the cloud don't have a Windows client. And they're hosted in Microsoft's highly available Azure data center infrastructure, which is very secure, always available on any device through a browser. And of course, a key feature is that it's based on SaaS licensing. So SaaS stands for Software as a Service, which means that you pay for it on a monthly named user basis. And we'll get into some more details about that. So the 365 product family, what is that? It's a suite of tools and applications that work together to improve the user experience, from things like single sign-on using your Microsoft account to being able to surface data and integrate processes across the platform. For example, displaying customer data from ERP in an Outlook panel when a customer emails you, or editing tabular data like product attributes for inventory in Excel and then publishing them back automatically to your ERP system, or being able to initiate a sales order, for example, directly from Outlook without having to navigate to the sales order entry in ERP. So the tools are really designed to work very well together. So that's Dynamics 365. Business Central is an ERP solution that used to be called Microsoft Dynamics NAV. You've probably heard of that. So NAV, this is a screenshot of Microsoft's Dynamics 365. If you look up NAV on the web, you find this page, which where Microsoft says Dynamics NAV is now Dynamics 365 Business Central. So they've retired the NAV brand. It doesn't exist as a product anymore. You can't purchase NAV any longer, and it's now called Business Central. So feature for feature, Business Central is essentially NAV in the cloud. I want to talk briefly about the future of Dynamics GP. Now, we don't know that much about what Microsoft has in store for GP from a features and capabilities perspective, but we do know a few things. First and most importantly, the beloved financial accounting and ERP software is not going anywhere. Microsoft is not retiring or sunsetting GP, and in fact, their documentation shows new versions of GP going all the way up to about 2024. And beyond that, it simply says DBA. So we can expect GP to be around for a while. And secondly, while we don't know precisely what features upcoming versions of GP might have, we are confident about one thing: GP is not going to the cloud. So what does that mean? Well, we can see that with the profound shift to Dynamics 365 branding, and from everything we know about trends in enterprise software, that Microsoft is shifting development resources and strategy towards cloud solutions across all their offerings. We see this very clearly in messaging all the way down from Satya Nadella. Cloud is the future. Not for GP, however. In fact, customers wanting a cloud solution will need to look towards the Dynamics 365 brand. And we even noticed this on Microsoft's website. The pages that are devoted to GP actually reference Dynamics 365. There are not that many pages referencing GP, but when we do go to the GP webpage, which I have up on the screen here, when you scroll down about 2/3 of the way through the page, they're already encouraging users of the website or GP customers to consider looking at Dynamics 365. They say it's a solution that's as rich as Dynamics GP and it has a modern user experience, it provides all the flexibility, and that it's simple to migrate from GP. So we can see that Microsoft's really saying, look, if you're interested in cloud, look at Dynamics 365. But if you're happy with GP and you want to stick to that roadmap, that is totally fine as well. So I want to talk about capabilities of each platform, GP versus Dynamics 365. There's a lot of content on the internet going back many, many years that describes the functionality differences between NAV and GP, and so Business Central, being the successor solution to NAV, really has the same features. And so, we could dig quite deeply into, and sort of peel the onion, exploring for the differences, and it's been the source of a lot of debate for sure on the internet. Lots of fans on both sides with strong points of view. And it can be very confusing because there's a lot of overlap in the main functional categories. Both solutions have rich functionality for financial accounting, for project management, and project accounting, inventory management, purchasing, procurement, and manufacturing. The differences are not so much in broad categories of functionality, but they're really in the details, and you'd really have to explore the details of any one of those areas to really understand what does Business Central offer at a functional capability level that GP doesn't, or vice versa. However, that's way beyond the scope of what we're going to do today. The point that I would like to make today, and the perspective I'd like to share, is that in most cases, what we see is that Business Central offers more flexibility and sophistication in each area. So both solutions offer capabilities in corresponding areas, and they're both very capable. But Business Central can be configured to support a broader range of business process scenarios, and it contemplates a significantly broader scope of business operations than what we see in GP. Let me be completely clear. I'm not here to make an argument that GP falls short in any way at all. Companies that use GP are big fans of GP. And we know that there's some powerful features in it that customers would be reluctant to give up. Batch processing or smart lists come to mind. We think, however, that Business Central contemplates all of the same business needs as GP and many more. And we have yet to see a business process or data processing scenario where Business Central doesn't have an answer to GP's features. If you can think of one, I certainly encourage you to get in touch because I would love to explore it with you. The key point to take away here is that Business Central, like its predecessor NAV, is a very full-featured accounting and ERP solution from Microsoft that can handle everything that you're currently doing in GP with a degree of flexibility that GP can't match. Business Central has a far greater range of flexibility and configuration, and largely this is because it was designed for a broader range of use cases in each area. Like NAV, Business Central is designed with companies ranging from small organizations all the way up to those with hundreds of employees or hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, or very high transaction volumes. So it's very, very scalable. And as a modern solution built for the cloud, Business Central is accessible on a broad range of devices and form factors with no additional setup and configuration. And it offers a user experience that's tailored to an individual's role in the company, what they used to call the role-tailored client in NAV. It's a web services architecture combined with the ability to write your own extensions, or as we'll see in a minute, leverage Power Apps, which makes Business Central a far more accessible solution for organizations that might have data flowing into and out of other cloud systems, things like e-commerce or CRM, or you name it. So if you're using GP and you've used it for a while, you're probably familiar with the amazing community of ISVs that make add-on functionality for GP. And the same has been true of NAV, and now in the 365 era, Microsoft's created an app store interface called AppSource, where you can find apps for Business Central. So for many of them, it's most of these apps, it's now easy to download a trial, and installation is a breeze with Business Central because it has something called an extensions manager. It's very similar to installing apps on your tablet or phone, and I'm not exaggerating much here when I say it's literally published and unpublished to try out an app. Very, very straightforward, and a much nicer experience than installing ISV products into your on-premise solution, whether that was GP or NAV. Just a much better experience. Microsoft's also been evolving what they call the Intelligent Business Applications Platform, which are cloud services and software tools that are built to be aware of each other and work together. You'd be amazed with the integration between Office tools like Outlook and Excel and Business Central. I think I mentioned some scenarios, for example, creating sales orders directly from a pane in Outlook that recognizes an email from a customer, or editing a large table of financial data from Business Central directly in Excel, while at the same time validating that data against Business Central's rules and enforcing user security. Pretty amazing stuff. Business solutions like Business Central or Customer Engagement, formerly CRM, also share something called a common data model. And they use something called a common data service that allows those apps to natively speak to each other. So it really enables a broader range of integration scenarios. It's no longer about wiring up custom plumbing between the apps. It's just there from the outset. Tools like Flow, now called Power Automate, enable you to create multi-solution workflows with no code, where events in one solution can trigger processes in another. Or Power Apps, which are no-code custom web apps that can support a wide variety of use cases, from things like field service data collection, think inspections, for example, or equipment inspections, to quick mobile access to data or order entry. Lots and lots of business scenarios. So when you're investing in Dynamics 365 Business Central, you really have to think of it as investing in an entire business application suite that shares a lot of interoperability. Now I'd like to shift gears and just run through a bit of a comparison on a few dimensions about what it's like to own and manage a GP on-premise implementation versus a Dynamics 365 Business Central SaaS implementation. So for one thing, the licensing model is an important difference and probably the place to start. GP is licensed on a perpetual basis. You essentially buy and own the licenses and pay annual maintenance fees to access the latest versions. Now, of course, I acknowledge there are some third parties who have deployed GP in a multi-tenant environment and do make it available on a subscription basis. So there are some options, but for the vast majority of customers, they own the licenses. Of course, many customers decide to stop upgrading and therefore stop paying maintenance fees. With SaaS software, however, like Business Central, the licensing model is subscription-based. So it's You can think of it like your Netflix subscription or your Spotify account, where you're not paying to own a software asset, but you're paying for the right to use the software for a period of time. And as long as you're paying those subscription fees, you have access, and the fee is all inclusive. On that point, with traditional on-premise software, you have to provide the computing infrastructure necessary to run it. So that includes physical or virtual hardware resources, networking and identity management, operating systems, databases, application executables. Computing infrastructure can be complicated, it can be expensive. When we contrast this with the SaaS version of Business Central, the software is running the moment your subscription is provisioned. There are no VMs to bring up, no Active Directory to integrate, no SQL or Windows servers. It's hosted on a multi-tenant infrastructure by Microsoft on Azure, so highly available, pretty much instant access, no infrastructure to configure. When it comes to upgrading, I mentioned that as long as you're paying annual maintenance fees on GP, you can access and install the latest versions. Testing and installing your upgrade is your responsibility, and many GP customers find this challenging, so they stop upgrading at the version they're on, which means that they're accepting the solution as good enough and say, well, we're not going to pay maintenance fees, but we're also not going to upgrade. So they don't get the latest features. However, with Business Central, the upgrades are twice a year. Microsoft has a spring and a fall release, and they roll them out to your tenant almost automatically. And we'll take a look at upgrades in more detail in upcoming slides. The effort required on the customer side to upgrade with Business Central is minimal. When you run GP, security and availability is dependent on your LAN and the infrastructure you run it on. It's possible that you've deployed it to Azure virtual infrastructure at an added cost and have very high availability and security, but we know that many GP customers are used to some downtime, slow performance perhaps, and they may be exposed to security risk because they've deployed it on servers running in their own offices, which may not be very scalable. And we'll hear about this experience with one of our customers that we helped last year. Dynamics 365 is offered at 99.9% availability in Microsoft's Azure infrastructure, and it's built to a very, very high standard. The user experience varies considerably across the two products. GP is primarily a Windows-based solution, has a Windows client. There is a web client available for a variety of supported browsers that you can install. Business Central, and we'll take a look at those user experiences in a minute. Business Central is only deployed through a web client. There's no Windows client at all, and it's a responsive web client. And what that means is that you can use it across browsers and devices. It really doesn't matter which. You don't have to use Internet Explorer on a Windows machine. You can use it on your iPhone in Safari just as easily. Lastly, there's disaster risk. And as is the case with any technology that you deploy on your own infrastructure or even hosted infrastructure, you must have a backup and restore strategy. With Dynamics 365, your data is backed up continuously across geographic data centers within Azure. And there's options to configure database backups in addition to that on a regular schedule where they're backed up to Azure storage. So more automated, less concern about not being able to access your data or having it actually even having a disaster in the first place that might cause a data loss. So let's switch gears here and talk about the experience, the user experience between GP and Business Central. Here's some screenshots of the Windows and web clients side by side. Pretty standard stuff, nothing too exciting, and also not very modern. These UIs are kind of dated, in my opinion, and way out of sync with the richness of what we find in other Microsoft products, like Office, for example. When it comes to the web client, there's complex instructions for your network admin to deploy it. It's not automatically provisioned when you install GP. And when you upgrade GP, the web client also has to be upgraded. Remember too, that just because you have the web client set up doesn't mean you can access it from anywhere. I know a lot of you are working from home right now. To access GP outside the office using the web client, you will need to VPN or have it exposed through your firewall. So not quite as straightforward. The Dynamics 365 unified interface is a modern and responsive web experience for all Dynamics 365 apps. So that means not just ERP apps, but CRM as well, for example. So the experience is very similar, and it's common, and it's accessed through a web-based interface. When you log in with your Microsoft account, you can see all your business apps right there. You don't log in separately to CRM or to Business Central. So again, I've mentioned a few times this concept of a responsive web experience, and basically what that means is that it doesn't matter. They've essentially moved away from the notion of using mobile apps to access the solution via a mobile device. So instead of installing Business Central for iOS or Business Central for Android, you simply point your browser on your device to the solution, to the URL, and it recognizes what device and what browser you're using, and surfaces the user experience that's appropriate for that device. And pretty much all features are available, which is something that is pretty new, because even with Nav, where we had mobile apps, it was a slimmed down feature set, so we couldn't do everything on your phone. Now, would you want to do everything on your phone? Of course not. But the fact that you can access virtually any part of the app in an elegant way is a significant benefit. As well, the interface is a fairly standardized interface across business apps, so they share common features for navigation and productivity enhancement. One thing I really like about the Dynamics 365 Unified Interface is that the interface is instantaneously provisioned. You can see on the screen here, I've shown an interface of a screenshot of the interface that we as partners use to provision new environments for our customers. So when we provision an environment, it's not hours and hours of consulting time anymore to just get the core technology up and running. It's literally as easy as creating a new subscription by filling out a web form and then provisioning the environments. And as soon as we do that, we add users, and they have access to the solution via the web interface. It's quite incredible. I want to talk about the upgrade process for GP and for Business Central. I think there's some significant differences that are worth knowing about. As we all know, software evolves very quickly. You may have experienced situations where software you use personally or in business wasn't upgraded to work with new systems or tools that you also work with, and maybe you're frustrated because you had to use, you couldn't move ahead with other things because of a dependency on an app that was held back, or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe you found that you couldn't upgrade to the latest version of a favorite software application because you haven't yet upgraded your operating system or your version of a related suite like Office. But when you move to software to the cloud, most of those dependencies disappear. Microsoft GP has moved, I think as of 2019, or maybe it was late 2018, Microsoft GP moved to what Microsoft calls the modern life cycle. And what that means is that Microsoft publishes a new version of the software every year. So that's great news for GP customers. Microsoft's committed to evolving the platform, and there is a new version every year. They haven't been super upfront yet about what's in each version, but there is a new version. And what that means is you'll have access to the latest features in GP as long as you're on maintenance. They've promised not to make major architectural changes, so upgrades should, in theory, be smoother than what they were in the past and require less effort. That being said, many GP customers we know are wary of upgrades because they may introduce more problems than the benefits that they bring. Upgrades may still require changes in hardware or operating systems or your database version. And at the end of the day, it's still do it yourself. As well, you may be held back by ISVs who haven't made their software compliant yet with the latest version of GP. When we look at how Dynamics 365 Business Central is upgraded, most of these issues disappear with an automated scheduled upgrade process. Effectively, being on SaaS means that customers are by and large running the same version of Business Central all the time, the latest version. This has huge benefits: access to new features and capabilities, interoperability with the rest of the platform, and less hassle. ISV solutions and customizations are treated as extensions. They're not embedded deeply inside of the core application code. So upgrading is always streamlined because you're always upgrading a pristine environment and then publishing your apps back into it. So let's run through the upgrade process and talk about, just go through how it works. So essentially, twice a year, we have a schedule that sort of looks like this. At the very beginning, let's call it March 1st of this year, Microsoft released a preview of the new version. So they said, okay, here's the Spring Wave release for Business Central, and you're allowed to download it. Well, actually, sorry, it's not downloaded, it's just provision it in a test environment and test out those capabilities. And that uses demo data. So that's not on your production system, that's just provisioning a test environment with a familiar Contoso data set. Then about a month later, the actual update becomes available. And then what you can do between that update becoming available and the upgrade window is basically schedule a test deployment. So you can create a sandbox environment of your, which is a snapshot of your production instance, and that's simply a matter of clicking a few buttons on the web interface. Create a sandbox, schedule the update to run against that sandbox environment, and evaluate how it went. And so again, there's not too many architectural changes or major changes, but you want to evaluate the impact on your reports, for example, in case field names have changed or anything like that. And of course, if you do have customizations or ISVs, validate that everything works. Once you've done that validation, you can schedule that update. You can either pick a date and have it scheduled to run on your production data, or Microsoft will do that automatically for you. If the upgrade fails, they'll let you know and keep pressing until it's ultimately deployed. And then the last step is to provide training to end users and enjoy the updated functionality. There's always, we're finding that there's quite a lot of new features in each version. So now that we've gone over what Dynamics 365 and Business Central are and how they differ from GP, we'll take an up-close look at something that I know will be of great interest to the accountants watching today. We're going to take a look at how financial data is segmented and tracked in Business Central, and how it improves on the capabilities of GP, and how you can access powerful reporting features with Power BI. Your tour guide for this segment will be my colleague Ramin Margi. Ramin is a CPA with many years of experience implementing ERP systems and working with financial data to streamline and improve financial reporting and analysis. So take it away, Ramin.
Thanks, Elliot. So in this section, I just want to go over dimensionalization of your chart of accounts and dimensions in general. Dimensions are kind of one of those more unique offerings or features, I would say, in Business Central. And it has a whole bunch of different use cases, but I wanted to really zero in on how it can work with reporting, specifically reporting off of your general ledger. But before talking about dimensions, we need to briefly chat about, for those who might not be, accountants or financial team members, I wanted to talk about natural accounts in your chart of accounts. So the way it works generally in the world of accounting is your general ledger is broken up into sections that delineate the nature of the account or activity that you're posting to. And in a standard chart of account, you have different ranges. Typically, there's the 1000s for assets, the 2000s for liabilities, 3000s for equities, and so on and so forth. It goes on beyond, obviously, revenue. I just kind of need to put a little bit of a cross section here to illustrate the point. And these will generally be broken down into header accounts and footer or totaling accounts to basically organize the chart of accounts in more of a readable and organized fashion. Generally, this is how transactions are coded in any financial system to really designate where things should go to ultimately to be rolled up into reporting. So in this example here, for example, you might have a bank transaction where the posting account would fall under the current assets range. So that might be 1105, let's say, for your operating bank account. And that would be the account that's picked and transacted to at the point of entering your financial information. Again, to most accountants, this isn't a new concept at all, but for any non-accountants, this preamble is kind of necessary to go and discuss segmentation and dimensionalization of data. One example we'll do just to kind of zoom in if you want to use that terminology on a specific subset of expenses here. We're going to go into and look at the general and admin accounts. So you have, for example, in this range of 60,400, you have all your G&A expenses. You'll have office supplies, meals and entertainment, and so on and so forth. So if you were to buy, a box of pencils, for example, you would code that to 6410. Your cell phone bill, you may code to 6440, and so on and so forth. So this is just really illustrating the posting accounts now. We're getting beyond just the header level and going into the natural account for posting accounts. But the chart of accounts, as everyone knows, goes a little bit further, because when you're purchasing, like in our example, pencils or office supplies, or you're coding revenue, or you're setting up your equity accounts or whatnot, it generally you're going to want more detail and be able to tag those transactions with attributes. So if we were to in this kind of example company look at the tags or the attributes or segments or dimensions, we may be looking at a four kind of faceted approach. Maybe you want to code the department at which this transaction is related to. So if you have a new forklift, you may want to code that to your warehouse department, or um, if you buy a new server, you may want to put it to IT, so on and so forth. But you might also want to segment or track, let's say, transactions against regions. So if you're expending marketing costs and you want to see where your focus regions you're spending the most on, maybe you want to tag it with a region code. Or maybe you have different channels for sales channels for selling your products or your services. Maybe you service wholesale customers and retail customers, and you want to track those in kind of their own fashion as well. Or maybe you have some regulatory reporting requirements. So maybe you have some standard industry codes. So there might be some regulatory body that has standard codes that you maybe want to track against to ultimately report on. Regardless of the need, generally most accounting software will have this approach, which is on the left, including Dynamics GP, which is a segmented approach. You're at the point of data entry, you'd be picking your natural account, and then you'd be picking your segments while transacting. So in GP, for example, that would be a concatenated string, let's call it, typically broken by either spaces or hyphens or whatnot, that use digits to delineate what the department might be, what the region might be, what the channel might be, and the industry, for example. Now, in most accounting software, there's some limit to that. In GP, I think it's 10 segments or 66 characters, whichever comes first. But it really gives you a very low readability. If you were just looking at your transactions, you'd have to know that 001 correlates to admin. You'd have to know that 55 is the Alaska region, and so on and so forth. It also makes it a little more challenging to pull reports. You'd have to kind of splice it out and kind of pivot off of it and do a whole bunch of lookup stuff. And it doesn't really give you much flexibility in terms of reporting, or there's a whole bunch of engineering that's required to report off of it. In Business Central, however, the approach is slightly different. Instead of going down this kind of row concatenated approach, you have more of a column and descriptive approach. So in Business Central, instead of being limited to just digits, let's call it, or numeric values, you can actually put descriptive codes. So when I'm looking at this line, even without having memorized the segments, I can see that the natural account is 6410, and it was coded to the department, admin department, the Alaska region. I know it's related to the retail channel, and so on and so forth. So it gives you a higher level of readability, and also by virtue of being separated into multiple fields or columns, let's say, it really makes the reporting side of things a little more easier, as we'll see when we go into the Power BI demo. However, it also has slightly other offshooting benefits as well. What this also means is that you can renumber any of these values in Business Central in isolation. So, let's say you outgrow your chart of accounts, or you saturate them entirely, and you need to add an extra digit at the end. You can do that just by going to the natural account of 6410 and just adding a 0 at the end, and it will rename the primary key of that field, and it will update everywhere else in the system where that's referenced. Same thing with each dimension. You might, for example, I know it sounds weird, but maybe you have your sales team and you had one department called sales, but now you're starting to expand your operations, and you're now starting to onboard an outside sales team as opposed to just an inside sales team as well. Well, you want to make sure that maybe all your historic transactions are your inside sales team, or tagged to the inside sales. So you can just rename, if you want to call it that, the sales department to your inside sales, and just create a new one called outside sales. And that way you have full historic carryover of your data. But if you're like me and you're more of a visual person, this will all make more sense when we actually go into the system to take a look, as well as kind of the reporting side of things, and kind of seeing the perks and flexibility around that. But before we do that, I'd like to jump into Microsoft Business Dynamics Business Central to kind of briefly chat a bit about data governance and how dimensionalization of your data also allows you to kind of keep your data integrity in check. When it comes to entering data or transacting in the system. So this is the chart of accounts page, and as you can see here, you have some fields here that tell you for this account what the balance is, current balance or the net change. And again, dimensionalization means that you don't need to have 100 or whatever number of accounts per each combination and permutation of your segmentation in here. If you really want to drill into the sales, or it probably makes more sense for people to do this on a P&L basis. Maybe maybe some of your expenses or costs according to dimensions. You can come in here and just filter your totals by that segment, if you want to call it that, or dimension. So if I go in here, I can just put in a department filter of, let's say, finance and HR. When I click on that, you'll see that the numbers changed. Basically, it's now applied this filter to my entire chart of accounts, and these amounts updated as well to kind of delineate or kind of filter down to that department code. And I can add my next dimension and put in date filters as well. But ultimately, then you can drill down and see all the pre-filtered underlying transactions that make up that amount. Additionally, you might want to put some controls in place to govern how people are coding expenses. So I can pick an entire range here, for example, salaries, and I can go in and set up some rules or validation when it comes to dimensions. So here's the 3 different kinds of validation rules that I applied here just for illustrative purposes. You can see I've made the department code mandatory when someone's posting an expense to any of these GL accounts. So this is very important from a wage perspective. You want to know your overhead. So I've made it such that the department code has to be entered when you're coding transactions to the salaries expenses. So if someone tries to post an expense without a department code, it'll error out. It won't let them post. And then maybe I don't want to fragment, or I want to make sure that industry codes are not captured in this range for whatever reason. Maybe you want to kind of prevent a dimension from being coded in a transaction. In this case, I'm saying they should not be allowed, or no code, no industry code on any of these transactions. Or maybe we want to make sure that all the transactions that get posted to these accounts are only set to a specific code. Let's say our salaries and wages are centralized, so maybe we want the region code for these to all be, in this case, Hawaii. It's a little wishful thinking there, but I can govern. I can put in a validation rule to ensure that if anyone tries to pick any other region than Hawaii, it will error out and say, no, it must be Hawaii. And in this way, I can really kind of zero in on how people are transacting against these expenses. Now, this carries over into the subledgers. So if you're putting in a purchase invoice, this isn't just the general journal entries. For example, if someone's putting in a purchase invoice to, let's say a travel company, if you're a travel agency, if you're posting a travel expense, in the invoice itself, it won't let it post if these rules are in place. So it trickles all the way down to the, and all the way up, I should say, to the subledger as well. But in addition to that, you can also get a little bit more granular with how dimensions are to be used. So let's assume you have a sales channel for e-commerce, but for example, maybe you don't offer e-commerce services outside of the contiguous and continental United States. So I can say the intersection of the channel dimension and the region dimension is limited. And what does that mean? I can actually get in here and say, anything that gets coded to the e-commerce channel cannot be posted against Alaska, for example, because that's not part of the contiguous United States, or Hawaii for that matter, right? So I can actually go in here and put in this intersection to prevent people from being able to pick an e-commerce or code to an e-commerce transaction in Hawaii. And so in that case, I'm now governing, how the data is kind of shaped in terms of cross-dimensional reporting, right, between two dimensions. So that's all fine and great, but what does that mean in terms of actual reporting? So for that, I'm going to switch over to Power BI, and I'm using the desktop one. Once you actually finish and publish this, it's accessible in the web, so it can be accessed on tablets and phones and whatnot. But I really want to illustrate here some of the just overarching concepts in Power BI and how dimensions dovetail with that. So this is a very kind of busy page, so I'm just going to briefly describe that this section here on the left are my filters, and you can see these are the dimensions I set up. So the channel, department, region. I decided not to put an industry dimension in here. A, because it would be cluttered, but B, it maybe didn't make much sense if I'm doing, a more, for my own financial purposes, maybe it's kind of an irrelevant code for tracking profitability and whatnot. Then I have these kind of table views. A lot of Power BI demos will have a lot of, colorful charts. I find that a lot of accountants and kind of core finance users like to kind of see more table views of stuff too. So I wanted to make sure that was covered here. And you can see this one's broken out completely by the actual natural GL accounts. And this one, for example, is aggregate rolled up into kind of more the category and subcategory that these natural accounts will roll up into. So it has that full granularity as well as roll up capability. And then on this side, I have a little KPI card, or kind of totals, if you will, where I just briefly kind of show the general kind of profitability. So we have our revenues, COGS, expenses, GP, and then the percentages on those. Then there's a little pie chart here. This is a little date filter timeline where you can, pick certain periods to report off of. This is a call out card, just giving me the total number of sales, a little bit of a line chart between their gross and net profit. And then this one I found a little interesting. It's more of a geographic kind of representation of the data I'm looking at. So right now I'm looking at everything, but the entire page is context sensitive. So if I were to pick, Cascadia, for example, you can see that it's showing me exactly which states I've set up that should fall into that Cascadia region. And then also it filtered all the other visualizations on the chart, on this report for Cascadia. So I can see the gross profit for Cascadia and whatnot. But really where dimensions begin to give valuable insights, we'll be using them in conjunction with one another. So if I were to look at the retail channel, let's say, overall profitability is 33%. If I zoom into Alaska, like if I drill down or filter to Alaska, you can see that my gross profit for Alaska is a lot higher than the average. And maybe that makes sense in terms of the geography of Alaska. Maybe that's, people are more used to walking into a store to purchase things perhaps. But that same call out in, Cascadia, maybe makes less sense, right? Maybe it's less profitable. But if I were to take a look at the e-commerce channel for Cascadia, I can see it's a lot more profitable. And maybe that makes sense because this region, home of Microsoft and Amazon and whatnot, maybe people are more accustomed to buying things online. So perhaps this will be a cue to maybe pare down our retail operations in this region and really beef up or kind of prop up and support our marketing initiatives for our e-commerce offering in that area. But again, with dimensions, it doesn't have to just be in a filter kind of basis. You can also throw in visuals that combine the dimensions. So this is called a matrix report. So now I can really kind of zoom in and pit my dimensions against each other. So I could pick my industry code along, let's say, rows, and then I could pick, my let's say my channel across columns, and then the intersection of these dimensions, I want to pull in, let's say the total expenses actually. Let's say total expenses, and that will show me kind of in this particular case, I have a whole bunch of non-classifiable expenses, but you can see where the intersection of dimensions can really provide a lot of interesting insights into where we're spending things and kind of how things are rolling out. So hopefully that was a good overview to kind of demonstrate how dimensions can work with your data and how you can derive insights and all sorts of interesting information from the dimensionalization of data. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Elliot.
Thanks, Ramin. That was very informative. I hope that the demo inspired you to think about how Business Central with Power BI could improve the way your company captures and reports on business activity. Now I'd like to switch gears and introduce you to another one of my colleagues, Josh Stowe. Josh is a consultant, ERP consultant with Catapult, and in 2019, he and the rest of our team worked with our customer GSL Holdings to convert from Dynamics GP 2013 to Business Central. And GSL is a really interesting company. They are comprised of approximately 40 distinct corporate entities and business activities across a variety of divisions ranging from entertainment and sports to venues and hotels, to hospitality, concessions, and that sort of thing. So quite a diverse business, very interesting situation. We're also joined by Vicky Barton, GSL's controller. Vicky was our main point of contact and our client throughout this engagement, and she has a lot of great experience both working with GP and now Business Central. So I'm going to turn it over to them for a discussion about what that experience was like. Welcome, Josh and Vicky.
Hey everyone, as Elliot mentioned, my name's Josh from Catapult, and I'm here with Vicky from GSL Group. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to have a little chat about the multi-company implementation that we did with GSL Group in 2019, where we moved you over from GP to Business Central's cloud platform. Understanding that we are relatively limited on time, we'll try to cover a bit of a broad scope of the experience. Obviously, there's a case study to follow this up that we'll get into later. So Vicky, just to give everyone a little bit of a background into this, how was your GP environment hosted and accessed previously by your team?
GP was hosted on a server that was located in Victoria, and most of my accounting team was located in Kelowna at that point. So the users were required to use a terminal server to remote into the host server before connecting to the software.
Okay, and can you tell us about some of the challenges you had running GP on some local infrastructure that you guys had to look after and maintain?
Yes, we faced numerous data losses. We had two actual hackers come in and steal all of our data. And we also, on a day-to-day basis, had a limited number of licenses available. So you could only work when nobody else was working. And on top of it all, there was no support as it was an outdated version. So we were only able to access the system under certain conditions.
Okay, and did you ever have any problems with like your server dropping or data loss from that point of view or anything like that?
Yes, all the time. Yeah, we would often, you'd hit save and everything would freeze up. And yeah, we would be redoing what we were doing time after time.
You have to go back to like the latest backup to
Correct. Yeah.
recover what you could, right?
Correct.
Okay. Cool. So how has Business Central, other than just being on a hosted environment that's managed by Microsoft and looked after and backed up from that point of view, from a data security point of view, how has Microsoft helped with your finance and accounting compared to when you were on GP?
Oh, it's night and day. We're able to work much more efficiently now, as all users are able to access the system at any time from any location. It's freed up all of our time to work on overdue and bigger projects. We've cleaned up our balance sheets, and in this day and age, I've got most of my staff able to just easily work from home.
Fantastic, which obviously, given the current climate with what we're dealing with, has come at a pretty good time.
Yeah, it's become the biggest benefit.
Cool. So what specific features in Business Central have been of benefit to you compared to GP, as well as like additional features that you didn't have in GP at all?
Well, quite honestly, having a system in which we're able to access support has been our number one. That's our, like, Catapult's been great, your big benefit. Previously, we're like searching internet answers. We've had to, but on the other, outside of support, we've transitioned from having to manually manipulate bulk data to do our reporting. In GP, we had to copy paste, it would crash, copy paste manually being entered, and Dynamics were just zipping off of our reports.
Fantastic. I know obviously you guys have an interesting company structure with kind of 3 divisions with their own controllers and stuff, and then you have accounting teams under that. But I do remember from during the project that Lisa and the team were starting to utilize a bunch of the automated features like recurring journal entries and things like that to help speed up things like that too.
Yeah. They figure they're saving, well, on the average, the girls claim they're saving about 25% of their day.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Cool. So overall, like, obviously it was quite a long project. We did like 38 companies, all linked with intercompany, and obviously split the 3 divisions. How did you find the implementation project? And then we'll piggyback onto that. What would you say the keys were to success were for that?
The process was overall great. There was, a ton of work involved, and there's always going to be some growing pains with big changes. But everybody has settled into the new system. It gets better every day. They're learning and, finding more about what it can do for us. And honestly, the number one key to success was communication with your team. And amongst us to get the actual backup work done. But from day one of the process, it was extremely important for us to understand what was going to happen and for us to be able to express exactly what we needed and expected. And we had no problems with that.
Fantastic. Yeah. So like from our point of view with the implementation process, obviously, like, we go through our requirements and then end that phase and then into the testing. And there's always things that come up and build upon. Like I remember we did credit card customization to automatically handle that kind of stuff. And so there's always things that come up. Can you speak to how having a dedicated resource, in your case, Lisa, being available to handle all your side of the work compared to everyone kind of trying to do a little bit each on top of their regular jobs helped? I would never recommend to do any other way. Having one person who knows what's going on under all different circumstances, like all the different companies, all 3 of the divisions, and I'm very lucky that she likes this kind of thing, and she can even, you guys were really great at communication, but if there were times where you're talking IT stuff and I'm talking accounting stuff, having somebody who's dealing with you on a regular basis it saved us, right? Like, it made everything much easier, everything much smoother. Awesome.
And just sorting, just organizing the people, and you're not dealing with, one employee who wants to do a report one way and another one who thinks it's better the other way. For consistency, everything, it's the way to go. Having a dedicated person is the way to go.
Awesome. And yeah, I mean, from my perspective with a bunch of the projects I've done, I notice a tenfold difference between how efficiently the data templates and stuff that we require to move everything from like your GP environment over to Business Central. The difference it made having someone who has the time already set aside in their work schedule, rather than, oh, you have your full-time amount of work on top of us giving you a heap of stuff to do as well. So I found that we had minimal delays in terms of waiting for data. She always turned those around pretty quickly. So that was a huge success for the project from my perspective. And I know that I have reiterated that sentiment to everyone involved in the planning of projects. So hopefully with the more that come through before they get to the consultant's point, that kind of is already in place. I know it makes a big difference for us.
Yeah, and we learned very easily, because at the beginning, and granted 38 companies is big, but we learned very quickly that not setting aside that time for her was going to delay everything. So, the first probably month we hadn't put that aside. So we were doing exactly what you said, and she's doing her job plus trying to accommodate everything that we need. And we realized that in the end, that's only hurting us, because it's delaying getting everybody going. So if that's the way to do it, is we set apart, I think it was half of her day. Every day was dedicated to this. And she didn't need that, but if she needed it, it was there.
Awesome. Okay, so going back to GP, is there anything that you do miss about GP compared to being on Business Central?
Well, I don't, but the staff, everybody else, some of the layout reports and functions, only because we spent so long using them, and we've based all of our external documents around their format. So we're still working on kind of consolidating that and updating our external reporting to get more efficient with Dynamics. So when we started talking about this, that was the only thing they could come up with.
Awesome. And so speaking on that reporting, are there any of the reporting tools out of Business Central that you guys do use extensively? Like there could, I know potentially using Edit in Excel to get your data out, open in Excel, or potentially diving into Power BI and stuff. Have you guys explored that at all?
We're using, the majority of the time at the moment, we're using the Excel. But again, with this drop in workload that's kind of dropped upon us now, we are starting with the Power BI, and then we're actually very interested and hoping to start with the JET reports right away.
Fantastic. And obviously going back to GP, you mentioned that all of your data that you were doing previously was kind of extracted out and then remanipulated and stuff like that in Excel. How do you find managing that data that's coming out of Business Central compared to managing that data that's coming out of GP?
Oh, it's much more workable, right? GP was, first of all, it was very, very slow. Second of all, once it was in the Excel version, still needed manipulation. At this point, we've got the core group of our reports in Dynamics built so that it's just copy and paste if we need to move it anywhere else, or just pull it right out of the system, and 100% better.
Okay. And with doing that reporting, do you find a big difference between the kind of account string that you used to have in GP, right? Where it was like company name, then account, then like division or department, whatever, compared to having just the account number and then using the dimension tags that have been associated with that?
That's another one that's a learning curve that some of the team are still struggling with, as far as the way we've set up manual dimensions and not required dimensions. But the reality is, it's again on the reporting side much better. I can pull a report on any dynamic, any event, any hockey game, whatever I need, and it's instant. It's perfect.
Fantastic. Yeah, I know Ramin earlier in this webcast has touched specifically on that. So it's cool to see that you don't have to rework all of those account numbers to kind of put everything in a usable format.
Yeah, no.
As well as obviously the other things he's mentioned about every time you create a division, not having to create multiple account strings and things like that.
Correct, yeah.
Cool. So one of the other, we mentioned the credit card customization that we did with you guys, but obviously you have one of the bigger things we did in your project was we integrated the way you do your purchase requests through SharePoint to Business Central. What results or benefits have you seen from that integration?
Oh my goodness. It just, this time of year, especially like once the season is done, in previous years, we need to go through SharePoint and close anything that's been missed just to keep it clean and not to have it bogged down and keep the search function faster. Now with Business Central, we're closing as we close the actual invoice in front of us, just a click of a button. So it's taken hours of work off our plate for right now. We love it.
Awesome. So obviously that kind of flows into the last question I'd like to get into about kind of the benefits of being on a cloud ERP. Obviously with a lot of people with their businesses will use SharePoint, and that's part of kind of the Microsoft Business Suite. So that integration was relatively easy from our point of view through an API, and from your guys' perspective, I believe works really smoothly because of that. But do you see any other benefits outside of kind of the ease of integration to your other business pieces of being in the cloud that we haven't touched on yet?
Not I guess that we haven't touched on, because the number one benefit for us is accessibility. Being, you know, so spread, like having the staff so spread out and the companies so diverse, like that are actually all coming up into one consolidated company. Accessibility and consistency within the program is what we need. That of course goes hand in hand with the security of our data after losing it a few times, and the updates and support that we can get from you guys is key.
Awesome. Cool. So thank you very much for your time speaking with us today about your experience. I hope the insight of actually talking with kind of some background on from someone who's gone through this process would be beneficial to the rest of our GP group that's hopefully paying attention here today. I'll hand things back over to Elliot to carry on with the rest of his presentation. Thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Vicki. That was great. Really interesting to hear about the experience of converting from GP to Business Central, some of the benefits you've been realizing, and what the experience of that process was like. I'd like to bring today's webcast to a close now and end with just some discussion about the process of migrating from GP to Business Central, and leave you with some thoughts about how to move that forward if what you've heard today has potentially inspired you to think about making that move. So one thing I want to talk about is the Microsoft Dynamics GP data migration extension. So this is an actual extension that Microsoft has created. It makes available to support the conversion of data from GP implementations to Business Central. And so that can save a lot of time and effort in the conversion process. And essentially what it does is it helps us map data from GP across a number of areas into Business Central. So things like a lot of master data, customers, vendors, inventory, GL accounts, and then open transactions. It works for all the supported versions of GP. And we also have the ability to use rapid start templates and configuration packages, which are essentially Excel templates that allow us to streamline setup and data migration by capturing a lot of the information about the way you use GP and using that to script fairly automated configuration of Business Central. When you do convert using the tools, you have a couple different options for the GL account migration. You can either set it up as a new chart of accounts and then map your old one from GP to your new one if it's time for a refresh, or you can map the existing chart of accounts the way it is, but transform it from a natural chart of accounts to a chart of accounts plus dimensions in the way that Ramin described. Inventory costing methods are the same when inventory is brought over from GP, and then you also have the option to either automatically post transactions that are brought over or manually post them and review them as you go. So there's some tools there, and as well the opportunity to, when you migrate, it's a huge opportunity to look at how you're doing business and your processes and evaluate the capabilities of Business Central and see if you want to improve or change your processes at that time. I want to wrap up by talking about how Catapult approaches migrations from GP, and in fact, all Business Central implementations, whether it's a migration from QuickBooks or simply accounting or Timberline or Sage, regardless of what a customer is converting from, we've come up with a unique and differentiated approach, which we think addresses a lot of the challenges that customers have faced in the past when contemplating things like migrations or implementations of ERP software. Rather than separating out all of the different components, the software you buy and the implementation project and the long-term support, we've combined all of that into a simple subscription model, which is essentially a predictable fixed fee. So we can offer implementation, end user training and deployment, basically end to end on a fixed schedule, combined with the software licenses, and then all of the updates, all of those twice annual updates, we handle that update process, manage system administration, and provide access to a dedicated help desk for a fixed monthly fee. So for GP customers, those who are attending today's webcast, we want to offer a special GP migration package. Now, these start at $1,600 US per month, and what that includes is your core financials, so GL, AP, AR, and purchasing, cash management, so bank accounts, budgets, reconciliations, financial statement package, all for $1,600 a month. So there's no upfront project fee, and then we just simply add $90 per user per month, which is the cost for Business Central SaaS licensing. And so that is an end-to-end price. And so it's not about hourly fees, and it's not about risky projects that might go on or might double in budget. It's really about making a commitment to getting you up and running and getting you realizing the benefits of Dynamics 365 Business Central and the broader platform as quickly as possible so that you can digitally transform your business. I hope that today's presentation has been valuable. We do have a written case study as well on GSL with much more information that we would like to share with you. We hope to hear from you with your questions and your feedback, and wish you the best of success on your journey to the cloud. Thank you.